So what is the single greatest threat facing a pilot in the cockpit? It's not engine failure, it's not even crazy weather. It's something way more fundamental. Literally losing control of the aircraft itself. Today, we are diving deep into this number one threat in aviation and the critical and often totally counterintuitive training pilots go through to conquer it.
And yeah, the statistics, they're pretty sobering. Loss of control in flight, or what the industry calls LOC-I, is a leading cause of fatal accidents. And that's not just in small planes. That's across general and commercial aviation all over the world. It is the scenario that every safety organization and every single pilot is laser focused on preventing.
Okay, so to really understand the problem, we first have to define it, right? The whole journey toward losing control, it all starts with what the industry calls an airplane upset. This is that critical moment, that tipping point when the aircraft dangerously strays from where the pilot intends for it to go.
Now, the FAA's definition is super specific. And the key word here, the most important one, is unintentionally. This isn't some planned maneuver. It's a sudden, completely unexpected departure from normal flight. And by defining it so precisely, it becomes this measurable event that pilots can actually train to overcome.
And here are those exact parameters. We're talking about the plane pitching its nose up more than 25 degrees, or down more than 10, or a bank angle that rolls past 45 degrees. And maybe most crucially, flying at an airspeed that is just plain wrong for the situation, like what happens during a stall. These numbers, they're the line in the sand between a normal flight and a real emergency. Now, this is a really important distinction. You might have heard pilots talk about unusual attitude training. In that kind of training, the pilot knows it's coming. Yeah, they might be wearing a hood so they can't see outside, but there's no real surprise. An upset is totally different. It is a genuine, heart-pounding shock that triggers a startle response. And believe me, that surprise, that's the real danger. So what can actually trigger an upset? Well, the FAA groups the causes into four main buckets. You've got environmental stuff like severe turbulence, you've got mechanical failures, flight conditions related to a stall, but the most complex and honestly the most fascinating one is the human factor. And this is where things get truly wild, because sometimes the most unreliable instrument in the entire cockpit isn't a gauge or a computer screen, it's the pilot's own body. Just imagine this for a second. You're flying in the clouds, totally socked in, no visible horizon. The feeling in the pit of your stomach is screaming that you're flying straight and level, but your instruments are telling you you're actually in a steep descending turn. So who do you trust? Your gut or your gauges? This dangerous conflict between what you feel and what's actually happening is called spatial disorientation. And get this, it's a factor in over 70% of these fatal accidents. Your inner ear, the thing that gives you your sense of balance on the ground, it becomes an absolute liar in the air. And to make matters even worse, you have the startle response. When an upset happens out of the blue, a pilot's first reaction isn't some calm, thought-out procedure. Nope, it's an automatic, physiological reflex. That split second of shock can cause them to freeze up, or, even worse, make an instinctive move that is dangerously, catastrophically wrong. So, if surprise and our own faulty instincts are the enemy, how in the world do you train to defeat them? Well, the industry came up with a specialized program designed to do exactly that. The answer is a program called Upset Prevention and Recovery Training, or UPRT. And its goal isn't just to teach some fancy recovery maneuvers. It's to arm pilots with the awareness to prevent an upset from ever happening. But if it does, it's designed to rewire their brains to overcome panic and act correctly in these insane, time-critical, and often completely counterintuitive situations. And this brings us to a huge distinction. UPRT is not aerobatics. Think of aerobatics like a perfectly choreographed dance. The pilot is in complete control, they know every single move in advance. UPRT is emergency response training. It's all about reacting correctly to sudden, unplanned chaos when your adrenaline is pumping and your brain is screaming. So that brings us to the very heart of this training. The single most important and maybe the most profoundly counterintuitive lesson a pilot has to master to save an aircraft from the most common type of upset. Let me ask you a question. What really causes an airplane's wing to stall? I bet most people would say flying too slow. But what if I told you that's not really right? The truth is, a stall has almost nothing to do with a specific airspeed.
An airplane can stall at incredibly high speeds or very low speeds. The real culprit is something else entirely.
It all comes down to something called the angle of attack, or AOA. You can actually feel this yourself. Think about holding your hand flat out of a moving car window. The air flows smoothly, right? As you tilt it up, you feel more lift. But if you tilt it up too far, exceeding its critical angle of attack, the air suddenly separates and tumbles off the back. Your hand just drops. That's a stall. It's all about the angle, not the speed.
So how do you fix it? The recovery is basically a 3-step process. But that very first step, it goes against every single survival instinct you have. When a plane stalls and starts to fall, your gut screams at you to pull back, to lift the nose up. But that just makes the stall worse. The correct life-saving action is to push the controls forward, lowering the nose to reduce that angle of attack and get the wing flying again.
Just let that sink in for a minute. To stop falling out of the sky, a pilot must first point the nose of the plane toward the ground. They have to completely unlearn their most basic human instinct and just trust their training. This right here is the absolute heart of UPRT, replacing raw instinct with intelligent, deliberate action.
And the FAA handbook just puts it perfectly. This isn't about how smart you are, it's about our hardwired human reactions being dead wrong for the physics of flight. The entire goal of UPRT is to drill the correct response so deeply that it becomes the new instinct. But here's the thing. This isn't a lesson you just learn once and you're done. These are what we call perishable skills. Overcoming that deep-seated instinct requires constant reinforcement. For pilots, preventing loss of control isn't some single course they take. It is a career-long dedication to practice, to readiness, and to safety. And it really leaves us with a fascinating thought that goes way beyond the cockpit. When you're faced with a real crisis, when your body is screaming at you to do one thing, could you force yourself to do the exact opposite if you knew it was the only way to survive? Could you unlearn your instincts?